We have Erik here from Lemon Shark. He is a security consultant with a technical background. He has handled security topics like CM and SOC, Purple Team, pen testing, and compliance. He's going to be speaking to us today about some ransomware issues. Should be a lot of fun.
Okay then. Hi everyone. Welcome to my talk. It's good to be here and really fantastic to be here in a beautiful city like this. And I've already seen and like the atmosphere around the open-mindedness and everything. So it's very good, and also to see everyone here in person. Now, my name is Erik. I work for Lemon Shark, which is a cybersecurity consultancy company. And I'm particularly interested in topics like the offensive kind of security and the defense kind of security. That is really my game. And let's have a look at today's agenda. There we go. So what we're going to expect today, we're going to have a look at ransomware, what's going to be the topic. A little bit delicate. We're going to look at the history of ransomware. We have some ransomware examples. And we're going to do a demonstration of a ransomware attack, what to do before and after. And I would like to summarize with how to prepare for an attack as a key to close with. Okay, so let's move on to the recent ransomware campaigns. Now, back in 2017, there was this big attack by WannaCry, which had a lot of companies, a lot of impact and damages from. For instance, also FedEx companies, and in Holland, we had also in Rotterdam, there were a lot of victims. And to move on with that, the ransomware campaign started also to increase, and even there were not only companies were victim, but also hospitals, for instance. So there weren't really any ethical or other morals as an objection to attack those companies as well. And to give another idea about the impact, for instance, there was an attack on a colonial pipeline. And could you imagine how it would be without gas or even without water? So the impact started to increase as well. And then we had an attack on the Cassia software, which is being used to manage other companies' IT infrastructure. And that was attacked with a supply chain attacked by their evil. And in that way, they were able to basically to destabilize a lot of companies. Well, the code, the decryption key was accidentally disclosed. That was the good news. And some of them were eventually being caught as well. Now, in Holland, we had the MediaMarkt under attack by ransomware. That was in 2021. And MediaMarkt is a big retail company with a lot of locations. And to give an estimate about the damage, the cash registers were completely offline and people were not able to return their goods anymore. So you can have an idea about the impact there as well. And recently we had an attack on Microsoft company by Lapsus, and they were even able to exfiltrate some of their code. Now, ransomware. Well, maybe you know what it is. And for the ones who don't, it's a digital hostage situation, and only by means of encryption, and your files are only being released after paying a certain amount of cryptocurrency, which usually is Bitcoin. Now, how does this encryption work? Well, this is a picture of asymmetric encryption. You have a public key and you have a private key. And what the attacker basically do, because asymmetric encryption can be very slow. Therefore, the attacker will first encrypt everything with a symmetric algorithm, and then the symmetric key will then be encrypted with the asymmetric algorithm. So that is a form of hybrid encryption, and in that way, the attacker will benefit from basically two of the properties of encryption. Now we're going to look into some ransomware history, and you're able to see it started 1990. Well, that's not entirely true. The first ransomware attack was done before that already, in the 80s. And that was done by someone who just distributed software on floppy drives to people who installed it. And after that, their computer restarted automatically. They were confronted with a message in order to, well, you want to use my software, you need to pay a certain amount, and you can put money in an envelope and send it to me, and then you can use my software. Well, that was Joseph Pop, that was in the 80s. That was basically the first digital way of extortion ever. And there were also non-forms of digital extortion. For instance, the screen lockers and the pop-ups you had in the browser message. There was an FBI announcement, you need to pay an amount of money, otherwise you would be reported to the authorities. It was totally fake and you could click it away. But you could imagine some people didn't like that. And next, the ransomware got more advanced in terms of introducing Bitcoin as a method of payment. That was done by CryptoLocker. Also, they included remote access trojans like the Zeus banking trojan, for instance. And then the ransomware group started to increase. We had, for instance, Cerberus, TeslaCrypt, Petya, and NotPetya, and the big WannaCry attack over there. And then what happened? The ransomware also started to get more advanced in a way to get the most out of the extortion by exfiltrating sensitive information, but also trying to move lateral and infect other systems, like being done by Maze, for instance. Okay, now, and then there were a lot of other species, and like lapses we have seen already. Now I want to move on to the next figure, and this is taken from Friar's Total in 2001, and back then Grand Crab was the top dog, having the most infections worldwide. Now, the thing about Grand Crab is they are probably retired, they're not seen anymore, and it's only effective in Russia or Ukraine for some reason. Okay. Here we have a code example of WannaCry, and do notice here there is a Rijndael algorithm being used, which is an advanced encryption standard, so a way of semantic encryption. And the other code example I have is from Eternal Romance, and that is an exploit being used basically to infect via SMB network shares as part of the attack. Now, and we have all these elements, like for instance, the one who is doing the negotiation, providing the software, doing the phishing attacks, all kinds of elements. You put them in a bowl and you stir it, and then you have the end result, which is ransomware as a service. And it is just a way, an ecosystem, to have basically the best possible way of extortion to generate as much money as possible. And the thing is, also, they've gotten so big because the currency in Bitcoin was increasing in that time, and they benefit from that also. They were able to expand their businesses. So very lucrative way in order to earn. Earn is not a good word, but to benefit from it. So here we have a ransomware kill chain, which looks quite similar like a cyber kill chain. Basically, it starts with an infection, a delivery, a phishing email. Then there is a reverse connection being made with a C2C connection, for instance, Cobalt Strike. Then the attacker has full control over the system. Then the encryption will start, generate public and private key. And during the encryption, the private key will remain on the attacker server. And then when the files are encrypted, the instructions are left behind how to pay to release the files. Now, when it's happened on a single workstation or on a server, or it could be also a network attached system, for instance. Now, we classified it as an attack type 1. And when there are more devices involved, for instance, the attacker has a foothold on the system and wants to try to move lateral and exfiltrate sensitive information, and also try to cover the traces, remove and destroy or encrypt the backups, then we call that a attack type 2 form of attack. Now, what we're going to do today is we're going to deliver a phishing email to the victim. The victim will actually fall into that, catch the bait, and click on the attachment. Then the malware dropper kicks in. We have a foothold on the system. Later on, we're going to raise our privileges in order to see if there are any more credentials we can collect. And when that's been done, we're going to try to move lateral to eventually encrypt this domain console right here. So I would just advise to sit back and relax and watch the show. But before we're going to start, I would like to point out that the delivery is being done by a PowerPoint presentation. And I would like to point out it's not the same presentation I've used to submit to this talk. It's for demonstration purposes only. Okay. Now here, I'm going to type a phishing email. And do notice also my poor English writing. And that could be just part of a social engineering way of attack, because the victim might expect some email from a Dutch guy. And next, I only have to send this email to the victim. And the victim has received the email. And notice, hey, I might have an attachment here I want to have a look at. So next, it seems that it's a PowerPoint presentation, but the content is disabled. So the victim enables the content here. And then it seems the attacker has already started a reverse shell in the background, or a listener, in order to wait for a reverse shell coming in. And when that happened, here, now the attacker has foothold on that system. Okay, now we're going to, in the next phase, going to look for privilege escalation. So what the attacker will do next is first listen on the network by using a responder. And it's just looking for all kinds of events on the network. And just accidentally, the victim can browse for a particular server and maybe make a typo. But in the meanwhile, in the background, some kind of negotiation is already going on. And the attacker will benefit from that by catching that negotiation and catching the hash. And when the attacker has the hash, he is able to decrypt it and get the user's password. So the next thing what the attacker will do is try to see if there is a way to elevate his permissions. So in this case, the attacker will upload a certain kind of script to the victim machine, which will retrieve a particular registry key what the victim has set without knowing, enabling automatic logon. Well, it's not a very smart thing to do, because when that happens, the password is in clear text. And we have also now the local admin password. So next, we are still connected with a regular user account to the shell. So what we're going to do next is put the shell in the background and going to upgrade it by using a certain kind of exploit. And when that's been done, we should now have elevated rights on our existing interpreter shell. And we are now an administrator on that system. So now we are already have more possibilities in order to advance our attack. So next what we're going to do is use the credentials we found, the password and our elevated permissions, and going to use that to explore the shortest path to domain controller, domain admin, and see if we can get everything together to create a ticket and log on to the domain controller to deploy our malware. So first, we're going to upload sharpen. Sharpen will collect for us the information we need to find the shortest path to the domain controller. So we're going to execute it. And then sharpen will collect all the information we'll need. And once that's been done, we're going to start Bloodhound, and the Bloodhound server will consume all of the sharpen's information to map out the network, so we're able to see what the shortest path will be to the domain controller. So that happens here. Click on shortest path. And notice here we've got the full attack path to the domain admin right here we can use to attack the domain controller. Okay, so when it's been done, the next thing we need is to create a ticket. And therefore, we need also the Kerberos hash of the service account, which runs on the domain controller. We've collected right here. Now we're going to bump into the shell. And we're going to start Mimikatz because we also need the anti-lim hashes to combine with the Kerberos hash to make our ticket to be able to log on to the domain controller. And when that's been done, we combine that information. We have a ticket now to create. The ticket is now put into memory, and the only thing we have to do now is to remote connect to the domain controller and just deploy the malware. And that's happening right here. So see, we already have a connection. We have the host name of the domain controller. We are administrator. And now we're going to upload the malware which is executing the ransomware for us. And there we go. And now we only have to execute the file we just uploaded. Sorry about my typing here, by the way. And do notice, we've got a Grand Crab ransomware infection now going on this domain controller. Oh dear, what we have to do now? Well, if we've got an infection like this, it can be too late, obviously, but we want to prevent it's going to spread even further. But before we even know there is an infection going on, there are ways in order to look for indicators which can lead to an infection. And that is what we're going to do with a SIEM system, security event monitoring. We're going to do some threat hunting on certain indicators of attack which could lead to a ransomware infection. So basically that happens as follows, is that you have all your perimeter devices here on the network, like the firewalls and proxy server, email gateway, and they are sending over their logs to a SIEM system, which is here. And all the bad things are happening here, and also inside the network are being captured in the log files and eventually collected. And now we're going to just to browse through all these log files by doing queries in order to filter the information we need to see if there is really a ransomware attack going on. And we start here by just running a simple query to see if there is a particular file extension on our system which could be related to a ransomware indication. And do notice, I think there are quite a lot of .log files already being found here. So that's our first type of evidence we have found. Next, we're going to look for some ransomware nodes. And basically, it's the same idea. We run a query. We gather all the information in there. And if I'm correct, I already notice here some decrypt.txt, which is enough evidence to actually confirm that it's a ransomware infection. And next we're going to run another query, and we're going to examine if there is some evidence about malicious software being used between machines. There was a connection right here, and there was Mimikatz being used here. So that is our third type of evidence we needed to start in our investigation. Well, basically there are a lot more indicators of attack. And for instance, we also could look for event log here. Usually part of an attack is that the event log is going to be cleared to make sure there is no evidence what could relate to an attack. And that is something we can include in our searches as well. In our example, we used a PowerPoint file, and the file type can also be included in the search if necessary. And also, part of an attack, usually sharpen is used very often. That is also something we can include here as well. And not even in this picture, usually the attacker will try to disable antivirus software in order to not being mitigated from the attack, and particularly real-time monitoring, and that could be included as well in the search if necessary. There are tons more of indicators which can put in these searches, but these are particularly interesting for our investigation. Now, what we have seen now basically is a red team exercise with an offensive kind of game, like the phishing attack and the way distributing the malicious payload. And you have seen the blue team looking for threat hunting in order to mitigate and build up the defenses. And it's a very good thing to do also when you want to practice those kind of things. And you want to make sure that if a ransomware ever hits your company or infrastructure, that you are prepared for it by doing these kind of exercises. So that is also a part to how to prepare for this. Well, first, obviously, without backups, it's going to be very hard to go to a previous state. So I would definitely advise to have offline or a write protected backup. Of course, macros, in my opinion, should be always disabled unless explicitly necessary, with a good reason, obviously. Email attachments should be scanned and even removed from the email if they are malicious. Basically, doing this kind of threat hunting with a SIEM system, and EDR is very handy to do, but EDR is something that is not very convenient, an extra addition on the endpoint, and here for not so long, but it would be definitely wise to include it as well. But I would say it's not a silver bullet, but it takes some of the pain away. Obviously, the segmentation will prevent any way of lateral movement, and simulation attacks, firewall drills, red teaming and blue teaming, I would advise to do as well. Now, if you've done all that, it could be still the case that there is a risk that backup is overwritten, malware is being run somewhere, and also people will just make mistakes by accidentally clicking on an email which had a malicious payload. And during a ransomware infection, it can happen that some systems are not reachable anymore. There is panic, and then you need to fall back on your procedure and playbooks. And if there's a gap in those playbook, then you can also run into trouble. So therefore, we just have to assume we are always infected with malicious files. Mistakes will always be made, and vulnerabilities will be exploited. And if you take all these things in account, then you are better prepared for an attack. So, to summarize my key takeaways, again, mention the backups. Very important to have these right protected or offline. And do practice cyber resilience by executing patching, because the most ransomware species and types abuse the existing vulnerabilities. A zero-day vulnerability into a ransom attack is very rare. What about cloud? Yeah, well, cloud is a multi-tenant environment. So if you have an attack on your end as a cloud customer and it spreads to maybe to one of your neighbors, you might get held against liable. So therefore the stakes are even higher. But on the other hand, there are also security tools, like for instance Security Hub and CloudTrail or Defender A2P available in order to mitigate those attacks better. So that's the other side. Obviously implement incident response and make sure there are no gaps in your documentation and everything is up to date. And document and learn from each drill or attack. And all these things can take some of the pain away, but in my opinion you should combine everything to apply security in depth. So these were my key takeaways, and I want to thank you for your attention, and I'm happy to answer any question. Thank you.